I'm Ian Mean. I'm consultant editor to Bristol News and Media, and this evening I'm talking to Angela Knight, CBE. Angela's a former Treasury Minister. She actually took a chemistry degree in Bristol, and she's been representing the banks and being a spokesman for the energy companies. She's got very strong views about the challenge of energy in Britain. Angela, what I need to talk to you about is energy, because we seem to have got in quite a lot of difficulty in this country, haven't we? Lots of people don't understand energy, they don't understand about switching companies, they're worried about the lights going out. Politicians seem to be using this in what you might call perhaps a bit of a power game. So where are we in the energy game here?
Well, that's mostly what I'm going to talk to you tonight, because I think we've got into a situation which is very, very muddled and confused. And I think that stems from two broad areas. The first is everybody talks about energy, but some people mean electricity, some people mean gas, and actually they are two different things. Yes, they touch, but at the same time, we need different policies for both. Most important for domestic, for households, is gas, because most of what they use is gas, and it's gas that keeps them warm, not electricity. And most important for industry, they're big electricity users. So that's why we've got to detach the two. And conflating them as energy, I think, has sort of got a lot of, that's the start of the confusion.
Should we start with the consumer?
Can I do my second thing? Because my second point is that when the current energy policy was created, which is about 2006-07, voted through as an act in 2008, nobody explained to the electorate what it was that it was meant, what was meant by it. Nobody explained the huge cost of changing the way we generated electricity. Nobody said how it was going to be paid. Nobody said what it would look like. Nobody talked about it in the way that was necessary then for people to understand. So here we've got a whole series of things that are with us today, which were never talked about, never explained. The industry didn't do a good job either. And people look at it and say, what am I paying for? Why am I paying for it? What's happening? Industry says, how am I going to remain competitive? It's not happening like this elsewhere. And I do think that we've got to get to an end of all this confusion, talk about it properly, and decide who pays how much and for what. Okay,
in 43 days we've got a general election. Energy, is that going to play a big part in the election, do you think?
I keep coming and going on that. I to some extent think it will play a part, yes. What I can't guess at is the extent of the part. If our election was November, if our election was January and it was cold, then I think it would be bigger, because people, were saying, I'm cold and look at my bill. But we're getting into the warmer part of the year. But nevertheless, it will play a part, because we've got, on the one hand, we've got one party, the Labour Party, saying, I'm going to freeze all the prices. And we've got on the other, we've got the Conservative Party saying, it's a competition review, let's see what's happening. People, one of the good things about it all is that actually people are switching. You're saying they're not switching. Well, I looked at the figures, about 4 million switched last year. I don't actually think 4 million is a small number.
So the message is getting through?
Yeah, it is. And there's lots more choice now. But what you can't run away from is the world price of gas. You can't run away from the big additions on your bill, both from energy policy, but also you pay for the networks, and the grid and everything. All that sits on the bill. And you can't run away from how much you and I elect to use. So there are some things there which are big and they're fixed and they're nothing to do with the energy company, because they just pass through onto your bill, his bill, my bill, everybody else's bill.
Now you until the end of last year, you represented, didn't you? Was it Energy UK?
Yes, I stood down from Energy UK at the end of December. That was an organisation brought together. I was asked to bring it together by the energy companies. It has 80 members, so that gives you some idea of the number of energy companies in this country. Because, there's all the policy decisions are still, there's a lot of them to be made. There's all the regulatory piece, which is complicated. you're never going to get anywhere as an industry if you fight amongst yourselves, and actually there's this explanation piece to people. So I brought it together for them. I thought it might take me about 2.5 years, maybe 3. It took me about 2.5, and so I stood down at Christmas.
Yeah, you were always there protecting them, and was that difficult?
Yes. What I always try,
because you're often trying to answer questions that are very difficult.
They are. What I always try to do, and it wasn't the first difficult job that I've done, is I actually try to be honest in the explanation. And sometimes people say, oh, you're defending this, or oh, you're defending that. Hang on, I'm trying to give you the explanation. You might not like the explanation, and you might say, I don't want it like that, I want something else. That's a very fair point. It's a very fair point. But the explanation is still the explanation. If you want the change, you have to turn around and say to the policymakers, this is the change that I want. One of the many interesting things that I've seen over this last 2+ years is what's coming through on the polls. Now, as you can imagine, I had one of the main polling organisations do some deep polls. So, you know, the deep dives, of course, they really get into what people think. But they weren't a lot different from anybody else's. And in effect, they say, well, yeah, don't like the industry, but actually, I've been treated all right in the main. Yeah, there's people like me. And there was this awfully nice person who came and read my meter. So you've got the big thing which says hate, but the smaller thing which says that wasn't too bad. And then when you get onto such things as, you know, green policies and renewables, people say, yeah, I think that's a very good idea, but I don't want the wind farms near me, and I don't want to pay for it. So that says, hang on, we haven't explained it properly in the first instance, you know, what the policy is. We haven't talked about how much it is. People haven't really had the honest story on which they can form a genuine opinion.
So, the honest story, a lot of people would think that these companies are ripping us off.
Oh, yes. Yes, of course they would.
That's incorrect.
Well, it is incorrect, but there's no point in me saying it's incorrect or the company saying it's incorrect. That's why the industry collectively thinks that a third party looking at it, that's the Competition and Market Authority, as they call them, is actually the only way to go. Because you've got to get third party, independent experts who themselves have got to act in a certain manner, because that's what the law set them up to do, come out with the answers. People do think they're ripping off. They look at this, they say, oh, they made X million, or tens of millions, or hundreds of millions. If you divide it by the number of customers, they make about £1 a week per household in profit. And that is actually sort of gross profit, that's before you've paid for your investment and all the rest of it. And interestingly, I go back to when people are asked the question, they think £1 a week's fine, yeah. But then you multiply it up by 10 million customers, and it's not fine.
No.
And if you say to somebody, how much do you think a power station costs? Well, they don't come out with $500 million, 500 million. Yeah, of course they don't. Yeah. And there's a real. I'm a believer in what I think is true democracy, which is not part of political democracy. True democracy is when you tell and you explain. And you put it all out, and sometimes it's warts, and sometimes it's not warts, but it's not easy. And you say, these are our choices. Now we've got to decide what our choices are. And one of the reasons I don't think that took place is, quite frankly, how many scientists and engineers are there in Parliament? I think that they made quite a pig's breakfast of what they signed up to. Not intentionally, but you know, I'm absolutely convinced that they confused energy and electricity. They signed up for energy targets, particularly the one from renewables, thinking energy was electricity. Hey, what about all the gas we use? So and then there's been, oh, I'm going to cover that up and I'm going to blame him. And that's why I say it's a power game, and I don't think that's right.
No, we're speaking here in Bristol, and obviously nuclear is going to be huge here with Hinkley Point. Now, tell us about Hinkley Point. You know, here we are, we're waiting for what they call the FID, the Final Investment Decision, where the Chinese are actually going to say,
absolutely,
yes, we'll give you the money. Isn't that a bad thing, that we're controlled essentially by money from China, a very large company that's a French-owned company?
I don't ever worry about international capital flowing into the UK. We've always been an open trading nation. You know, I mean, when Walter Raleigh, you know, sailed these boats off, he came back with tobacco and potatoes, and actually we've been quite addicted to both for a great many years, you know. And we weren't, and we're a trading nation physically, we're a trading nation as far as financial services are concerned. And so the movement and flow of capital, especially when it's quite so much, I mean, this isn't 1 billion or 5 billion, this is 15 billion pounds, it's not for 1 year, it's 40 years.
Yeah.
You're going to go around the world, and we've provided an attractive proposition. So, no, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we've got to be careful about how we control it, yes. And we've got to be careful about what I would call the operating contract. We've got to be careful about having proper British protections, because this is the United Kingdom. Where I also think that we need to scratch our heads and consider is Hinckley's one. We need a lot more than one. I mean, our old ladies, they've done a wonderful job, and like lots of old ladies.
Coal-fired.
Yeah, well, our old lady nuclears, I mean, they've done a wonderful job. And like lots of old ladies, what you don't make them run, but if you leave them walking steadily, it's amazing the distance they'll cover. And so they will last for some considerable period of time, but we have to replace them. And I think that we need to ask ourselves a question with nuclear, as we do with every other part of what we're doing with energy. We ask our question is, are we choosing the most cost-effective route for replacing our nuclear? And I think that there is an answer here which the next government or governments must reflect upon. Because one of the biggest risks out is not nuclear per se, it's the big construction project. This is all about huge holes in the ground and great massive concrete and all that rest of things. And so that's quite a risk, and you don't get to earn anything until you've been a few years digging holes and building concrete walls. So if you want to move the risk down, which makes your capital cheaper, you say, okay, as a government, instead of us going out totally for private capital, we'll find a way that we build it off the government balance sheet, as it were. So you take the risk like that. And then the insurers and the pension funds will say, oh, well, that's all right, because once we're over the risky bit, I'll have a bite of that cherry. You can sell it to me, and you give the operating contract to the nuclear operators. And there has been some work quietly done inside some of the clever people inside some of these clever places. And they come out with an answer which says, you can have the nuclear, absolutely, but actually it'll cost you quite a bit less. And when people are worried about affordability, I think policymakers have a responsibility not to go cheap, but go to the most cost-effective route. I use that expression wisely.
Let's just talk about another facet of your career, banking.
Yes.
Because I remember seeing you protecting bankers,
explaining
I have to say,
banking. Yeah.
And that was quite a difficult job, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I was hired to represent the Chief Executive of the British Bankers Association, I didn't know we were going to have the biggest financial crisis for more than a century. I don't think many people did.
Did you find it difficult?
Yes.
Because talking to you now, you're very outgoing.
Yes.
When I used to see you on TV, you obviously had all these questions coming at you.
Well, look at
it must have been difficult.
Yes, it was. I mean, first of all, look at the sorts of questions I got, and secondly, a lot of them personally. What about you? What are you? You know, and one of the reasons that I left, I mean, apart from the fact that 5 years is long enough in any job, is that I was taking the questioning personally, and I don't think it was intended like that. It's just that I was the person that was there. Now, there's one big thing that I will defend the banking industry, and that is there's 1 million people who work in the banking industry. There's people in most of the roads and how, you know, in roads and streets of this land. Were they responsible? Of course they weren't. Of course they weren't. They're the people actually doing the job in our branches. They're doing the job in our call centres. They're doing the jobs in HQ as well. So I felt that saying all bankers are ghastly people was completely wrong. By all means, go for those who made the mistakes. And they were made inside and outside the industry. They're made by the regulators. They were made on other sides of the world. We were partly a recipient and we got some things wrong ourselves. Don't say all bankers are bad. They're not. A million people aren't bad, of course they weren't. And I always wanted to get that balance. There were huge mistakes made, and God knows what they're finding underneath. But in the main, we were also a country in which the majority of the banks that we lost were the former demutualised building societies. It was about lending too much to too many people at the wrong price. And then in amongst those, there are clearly some people and some activities which were much worse than that.
Why weren't people brought to account more?
Well, I think the answer is they're being brought to account, but slowly. You know, there are some forms of court cases or investigations taking place around the world, and I think they're just taking a long time. And I'm expecting that we'll see more more take place in that area. But at the same time, the law was not clear, and the clarification of the law needs to take place. And I don't blame the legislators for that, because this sort of crisis was not expected by anybody. Whether it was the banking industry, the regulators said, no, everybody, the way we've regulated means you've offset the risk here and you've offset the risk there.
Do you think it can happen again?
You can never say never, but one of the things that won't happen again, I would sincerely hope, is everybody standing to one side and saying it's somebody else's problem. Problems will always happen, and if you've got a problem, however big it may be, certainly if you act early, if you do it quickly, if you bring all those who you need to into the party, you're going to sort it quickly and sort it much more easily.
Now, Angela, one last question. 43 days to the election, very quickly. What's going to happen?
I don't know.
What would you like to happen? Bear in mind you were a Conservative.
I was Conservative and
Minister.
Yeah, and you are correct. So I would prefer that we had a Conservative government, and my second choice would be a coalition that has still got the Conservatives there.
Of who?
Well, you tell me what parties are going to get elected, but you know, the Conservative Lib Dem coalition has not done a bad job. It really hasn't done a bad job.
But the Lib Dems won't get anywhere, will they?
The polling shows something slightly better than we think. What, to me, would be the worst outcome is if somehow we end up with the Scots Nats holding power over the entire country, because they're the party who voted to get rid of the English. And then if they're then holding power, that strikes me as not a happy scenario at all. And that's the one that really sits in the no-no camp as far as I'm concerned. And as you rightly said, a coalition which has got the Conservatives there as the largest party would undoubtedly be my preference.
Thanks, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you.